Rock and roll fantasy camp became part of pop culture.
Welcome to Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp.
You would have a 15-year-old kid playing drums and a dentist on guitar. If this band were a real band, it would be the weirdest band ever, but cool.
If Bob Dylan and Gene Simmons and Jimi Hendrix auditioned for The Voice, once upon a time, you think we'd make it?
And you just watched a sneak peek of the documentary film Rock Camp, which was released this week. The movie tracks the history of rock and roll fantasy camp, which is the brainchild of music producer David Fishoff, who joins me now from Los Angeles. David, I tried not to give too much away in my introduction there, but please tell our viewers who haven't had the pleasure of seeing the movie, what is Rock Camp?
The Rock and Roll Fantasy Camp is something I created 25 years ago that allows the regular musician, the regular vocalist to come and jam with the biggest superstars on the touring music scene.
And David, you have so many A-listers in this film. We mentioned some of them, but Gene Simmons, Alice Cooper, I mean, I could go on for minutes and minutes here. But I'm wondering, how did you get these A-listers to not only work in the camp, but also just be involved in the film?
So first of all, it's very hard. In the beginning, 25 years ago, before the meet and greets, and rock stars never would meet people. And I started. It was hard in the beginning. Many musicians say, "Oh, turn me down." But once Roger Daltrey, the Who, did it, and he loved it. He had such a great experience, and he stayed for 3 days, and then he decided to jam with them. And the last night, he said, "I'll get you Brian Wilson." And then, once I started getting more of these players and artists, they recommended, Jerry Cantrell recommended Nancy Wilson. So, it's really word of mouth, and they love it.
And tell our viewers who aren't familiar how you came up with the idea for this camp in the first place.
So I created Ringo's All-Star Band about 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And I went to Ringo with this idea to create an All-Star Band, and he's still touring. And but after the fourth show, people said, you can never put together all these superstars on one tour. You can do a one-night concert at Live Aid or a benefit concert, but you can't tour these people, David. It'll never work. And I was sitting backstage at the Garden State Arts Center when all of a sudden Nils Lofgren walks over to me and says, "David, I'm quitting this tour." And we had just 4 shows into it, and I had mortgaged my home. Clarence Clemens, he walks by, and he says, "I'm quitting too." Now all of a sudden I saw my house in New York go down the river. I went to run to find Ringo. I couldn't find him. And I said, "What's the problem?" He says, "Joe Walsh and Levon Helm are having a fist fight, and there's blood and knives. You better go in there." So as you'll see in the movie, I walk into a room seeing the great Joe Walsh and Levon Helm with blood all over their hands and a knife and a glass bottle, and they're screaming and yelling at each other. And then they both turned around. I yelled at them. I had a bunch of babies, and they turned around and stuck their tongue out at me. So I realized how much fun these rockers have on tour.
Right. That was the moment when it all came together for you, David. I'm curious, like you just mentioned, that incredible story. We learn a lot about you in this film, including that you were on the Peloton train before COVID. But I'm curious what it was like for you to hear some of the greatest icons of rock and roll describing you so positively throughout the movie.
Well, I really enjoyed it. And I enjoy these. These rockers are 10 years and 15 years older than me. So I'm like the youngster when I go on tour. Right. And I really enjoy them. And I learned a lot. I've learned so much from being on the road with Ringo and with all these rock stars. And it's incredible how much you can learn from them, especially from a business point of view. Their brands have been around for 50 years, more than most companies.
Right. And David, quickly, while I have about 1 minute left with you, tell me your favorite story from Rock Camp. What's your favorite interaction you've had?
Well, my favorite story of Rock Camp is really to see the way all these campers who have come to camp, and as you can see in the movie, you saw 4 of them go through a life-changing experience, but we have thousands that we could have done the stories about. And there's so many ones that, mainly the ones I love the most is when they write to me after camp, they say, "David, I got good news, I got bad news." I said, "What's the good news?" "Well, I'm going to London School of Drumming," or "I quit my job and I'm going to become a full-time musician." "What's the bad news?" I said, "Well, I can't afford to come to camp anymore." Right. I love that. If they've learned something, that's best for me.
David, so incredible chatting with you. Such a really feel-good film at such a tumultuous time. Really appreciate you joining us today. Renita, it's such a great film. I highly recommend watching it whenever you can.
I will watch it. Thank you so much.